Great. Hello, everybody, and welcome to what is going to be the final session of a really intense few days. And I'm sure that Donal and the team at the Irish Council are going to be quite in the thank God it's Friday mode, because it's been really an intensive days and amazing inspiration coming through everybody's screens as well. So I know it's a bit of a cliche to say we have a stellar lineup, but I think in this case it really is true. We have a brilliant lineup for the next hour or so together. And I think I'm really happy that this session was organized, because I have to say, looking at this from afar, so here from the European perspective, we heard a lot of focus on numbers when the new housing plan was launched in Ireland. So a big focus on number of units and number of billions. And this always really makes me a little bit nervous, because we all know that for people living in the homes, it's not about the numbers, it's about the quality of their homes, the fact that the homes are adapted to their needs. So I really welcome this session, which is about taking a step back, but also a step forward. So it's about looking at the future proofing. So when we're looking back at what has been achieved with this plan, let's say, 20, 30 years, what will we be seeing? Will we be seeing amazing places where people can reach their full potential? We all know that the housing sector mistakes take a long time to correct, both on the policy front, but also in the built environment. So this conversation we have today is so important, because we have to be also looking at what we're going to be looking back on in a few decades, because that's really what it is about in housing. It's about numbers, but it's also about quality and future proofing. So that's why I think it was, really, we're finishing on a high note and a really important topic. And I hope that will be really at the center of the Irish housing plan. So let's kick off. I think, John, you're going to kick us off Alison, you're going to kick us off. Yes, sorry. So recently in your post, Alison, and we've been following you on social media, and a really important position you have there as well. And let's hear from your perspective as the Lord Mayor of Dublin in about 8 to 10 minutes. It's quite short, on your perspective on how we can really future-proof our housing system.
Thanks very much, Sorcha. I'm delighted to be here. Yeah, I think we all anticipated the new Housing for All document, and I've pulled out there some of the sections in it. And I don't think there's any of them that we could disagree with when we look towards both the present and the future of housing. I'm going to concentrate on the last one, because I think that's really important, and it speaks to what you yourself have said, Sorcha, about it's homes, it's about the people and the quality and how they feel in them. So it's about, for me, building and supporting sustainable communities. And the other word I'm going to concentrate on is all. It's housing for all. And I think people come from a diversity of backgrounds, different ages, different abilities. Perhaps some have particular accommodations that they need. But I think everyone wants to have a sense of belonging in their community. They want to have the services around them in that community, and they want to feel that they can contribute. So in Dublin City Council, what we did over the last 18 months was, I suppose, discuss the issues that we would see on the ground. And a lot of our work is in the area of social housing, but also we have acute awareness of those that don't qualify for social housing, but are stuck. They're really struggling with affordability when it comes to housing. The other concept that we developed for ourselves, because there is technically no definition in legislation, is public housing. So we came to a definition that reads that it's high quality, sustainable housing for all citizens regardless of income, that's rented from one's local authority or its nominees, which will be our approved housing bodies, housing authority or agencies, so as to affordably and securely provide for one's particular housing needs. And that affordable piece, we know that at social housing, there is a differential rent, and that's something we would like to see carry on into this concept of public housing, that it would be income related, because I think when you're paying above 35% of your disposable income and rent, it's not affordable. The other aspect of this is security of tenure. Again, something that's very much an underpinning principle in social housing, but sadly, unless you own your own home, and to a certain extent you could argue unless that you have your mortgage paid off, there is no real security of tenure there. And sadly, our private rental market doesn't afford its tenants that. There's always a conversation around what some people term mixed tenure. At council level, we don't like this term because it assumes that if you own your home, you've a bigger stake in the community as opposed to those who rent it. So we would prefer to see mixed incomes, acknowledging the sustainability of different income levels, particularly for services in any community. And perhaps we should be moving towards defining it as social mix instead. We're very conscious of inclusion, and that everybody, according to their need or their particular housing need or physical need or mental health need, is included in that. And one of the categories, if you want to call it a category of people that we find are particularly hard done by, are singles. Including people that have been separated. A lot of our first-time buyer schemes offer great incentives for those starting out on the housing journey. But for a lot of separated people, particularly if you're the person that has access to the children and you're on your own, it's very difficult to get a home that allows you to have access and have your children stay over. So there's a lot of planning to be doing for housing to ensure that we do build those communities. And I suppose from a local authority perspective, one of the ironies when we are actually trying to plan for communities is that the Department of Housing doesn't provide funding for community planning. We're also very conscious of income and the trajectory of work at the moment, where we see an increase of the gig economy, insecure, precarious work, the hollowing out of that middle income jobs, and also increased mobility. And I think when it comes to planning, we need to be accommodating people moving in and out of our cities. As I indicated, affordability and security were one of the key areas that of our concern. And I've pulled a few stats there and some figures, looking at rents and looking at income. And I think this is where we have real difficulties. We have seen over the last, I suppose, decade, a massive increase in build to rent, massive increase in the commodification financiation of housing. And you can see there, this is in the suburbs of Dublin City, 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed rents. That's a daft averages for our city in the last quarter. And then while it's 2019, we see there the median income. And I think there's a time bomb, particularly into the future, when you become older. And one of the reasons we would be supportive, and I said I would be pushing differential rents, is that it accommodates your life cycle, whether you have a period of unemployment or particularly where you retire. And we all know on retirement income drops. In that particular median nominal household disposable income, the individuals there over 65, yes, they have a reduced income, but currently a lot of our older people are homeowners. However, into the future, that is not going to be the case, because buying a home is becoming increasingly difficult. A, because there's fewer of them for sale because of the massive imbalance in build to rent. And also, if you're paying the rents that are there on the screen, you're not going to be able to afford to save to buy your home. And I do think one of the drivers of home ownership is that security in older age, particularly. Another element I think we really need to look at from a sustainability perspective, and it's sustainability not just for housing but also for our environment, is reusing and recycling. It's something I was very disappointed that the Housing for All document did not address. There seems to be an issue about acknowledging that vacancy is a problem. I think it's really frustrating for people who are walking around our cities and towns and see vacant properties when they're struggling to find a home. It's also very frustrating for an environmental and sort of like just a community cohesion perspective. So I think we have tried some incentives. We've had the repair and lease, which is not really working. So I think we need to come at this from perhaps a bigger stick. The vacant unit tax is something that has been mooted, and I think it would work. I do recognise that there are difficulties, particularly with over the shop vacancy, pertaining to the challenge of having a separate entrance for fire regulations. So I think we need to become a little bit more imaginative, let's say, when it comes to reusing and recycling our buildings that are vacant. And the other lens that we need to use there is the embodied carbon element, and from an environmental and climate change perspective. So perhaps that the report that the vacancy rates they are taken from tackling empty homes from the Housing Agency needs to be reread and perhaps acted on. So my final slide here is about, I suppose, balanced development. And I've mentioned, I suppose, that the build to rent that I feel is imbalancing housing availability or affordable housing availability. Renters need to be acknowledged as home builders and community builders, and I think we need to view them through that lens as opposed to transitioning into home ownership. The other thing I think we've learned as a city in COVID, that we don't have enough people living in our city centre. Again, there's an imbalance there where we have a lot of employment in our city centre, but not sufficient people living in it. And we need to be more proactive. And tackling vacancy is one element of that proaction, but the other is not seeing every single site as an opportunity for a hotel or office blocks, but rather that we see sites vacant in the city as an opportunity to build residential development. Dublin does have attributes of the 15-minute city, whereby we would have all our services within cycling or walking. The only outlier here, and it links in with needing more people living in the city, is employment. We still have a massive amount of employment opportunities only situated in our city. And when it comes to rezoning, what we may feel are underused enterprise or industrial space, I think we need to rethink, should we not be developing more opportunities for employment in our suburbs and rebalancing out the various aspects of life there. An inclusive life cycle approach, I think this is a particular challenge for social housing. We tend to build senior citizens complexes in isolation to other developments. They're excellent for infill, and particularly where we want to create social housing in already established communities. But it's something I think we ourselves and across the board need to look at, having a mix that actually provides the housing need, and that would be older people and single people, and then families in the middle, so that within your own community you can upsize or right size rather, without having to move out of those communities. And I think the biggest challenge that we have to future-proofing our housing system is the commodification and financialization of housing. It's a global problem. It's got a massive reach, and it's something that is driving a lot of young people in particular out of our cities back to their parents' homes, because they literally cannot afford the rents, because renting or building to rent or buying up massive housing developments is now seen as trading, achieving assets, achieving wealth, rather than the actual social function of housing, that is a home for people. I've two images there. One is about the rezoning of a site in my own area, an area with a massive housing need. It was an old site, the Chivers Jam Factory, some of you may know it, that was vacant for about 25 years. And we rezoned it on an offer from a developer to build housing on it. That housing was very reasonable development that really fitted in with the local community, but unfortunately then it went to what they and Bord Pleanála inspector described as a monstrosity and actually recommended refusal of the planning, but Bord Pleanála did accept or did give it permission, and now we see that it's up for sale. So it's been flipped. The site has been flipped with planning application on it. And in Dublin City Council, we would note there's about 23% active housing applications, and the rest are not active. And we would also note that part of that is land hoarding and increasing the value and speculation. We also see that there is, I suppose, ultimately what we need to do is to enshrine the right to housing in our constitution. It's there as an SDG to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable, which we are meant to achieve by 2030. But I think if we're really going to take the future proofing of our housing system seriously, we have to recognise housing as a right. We have to legislate for that, and we have to regulate for that. And that very much means regulating the operation of financial markets in our towns and cities in our country, and putting the right of someone to have a safe, secure, affordable house at the centre of not just housing policy, but also our financial and tax policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. I see John taking notes there. I think it's really, we're in a great position as a country to have such a tuned in Lord Mayor of the capital city. So I hope you'll be bringing a lot of those points onto the Housing Commission. Obviously, the whole question of build as or buy to rent as opposed to buy to live is one all over Europe that's coming up. And we've recently seen moves from Rotterdam to actually outlaw to outlaw the buy to rent and make it much more difficult, make it much more difficult for investors purely to follow that path. So, John, I pass the screen over to you, and you're here today with your hat as the chair designate of the Housing Commission. So really exciting and extremely important work ahead. So please give us a bit of an insight into what you have in mind.
Thank you very much, Sorcha, and good morning, everyone. And thanks to the ICSH for the invitation to speak. As has been said, it's been a very stimulating sessions this week, and I think we've all learned a lot. I'm just going to give you some thoughts, in terms of the future of housing, and I will touch on the Commission in terms of what it's to do. So can everybody see those slides? In terms of the future of housing, the first thing we need to focus is on communities and the communities that we create and support into the future. And as Lord Mayor said, in terms of security and affordability are critically important, but also kind of participation, inclusion of everyone in society is where we need to focus on. So the first thing in terms of the future of housing, it's the future of our communities. And in terms of creating sustainable communities, we need to definitely provide more housing. I think that's a core part of the plans. But it's about creating a good place to live. It's about inclusion and participation. And that's something we always need to look at in terms of if we are providing housing, which we need to do in an integrated way with other services, is are we achieving inclusion and participation? In terms of sustainability, and in a broad sense, we need to create sustainable places for people to live, socially, economically, environmentally. We need to tackle the climate change crisis, and we need to tackle the biodiversity crisis. And I would separate the two out. Often biodiversity gets lost within climate change. But I would again ask you all, in terms of what you're doing and the decisions you're making, is, are you addressing climate change? Are you addressing the biodiversity crisis, and what are you doing from a biodiversity perspective? There's been various, documents and publications and policies recently and over the last number of years. One which has been discussed at great length this week is the Housing for All plan. Very important plan that brings us up to 2030. We have a lot of changes on the housing legislation of the Housing Acts from 1966 up to 2021. We have a recent Affordable Housing Act. So the first time we've had a standalone Affordable Housing Act for both affordable purchase and cost rental, critically important, and critically important for the approved housing body sector. And then we have another document, very important, the National Planning Framework, which goes out to 2040. But in terms of, I'm not going to go through Housing for All again, because that has been covered a lot over the last number of days. But the core of Housing for All, and as the Lord Mayor said, it is to be Housing for All, is about sustainable housing system. How do we create a situation where we are housing for all and sustainable into the future? And that's what we need to focus on. And I just very briefly mentioned the National Planning Framework, because often when we're focused on delivering housing, it's more important where the housing is located, as opposed to how the houses are designed themselves. And a big focus of the National Planning Framework is focusing on compact growth, building in our towns and cities, within the existing footprint of built-up areas, and using those infill and brownfield sites. And then the other important area in terms of vacant and under-occupied buildings, we have to do a lot more. As the Lord Mayor said, we have to do a lot more with the vacant buildings. Ireland has more vacant buildings as a proportion of our buildings than any other country in Europe, possibly any other country in the world. So we have a really serious issue with vacant property, and we need to do a lot more in terms of bringing that into use. And also from an environmental point of view, again, as mentioned, is, from the embodied carbon point of view, we should reuse our buildings as the first thing. So I'd again ask all of you, is always be attentive, to vacant buildings. Can they be brought back into use? And don't demolish if you can avoid demolishing existing buildings. Just on compact growth, I won't go through it again, but it's really important in terms of the decisions we're making is to focus, on building in our towns and cities, and particularly a lot of our towns, the centres of our cities, centre of our towns, we do a lot of work to revitalise those. And again, it is more sustainable in terms of having better public transport, better facilities, and creating good places for people to live. So I'm just going to touch on the Commission on Housing in terms of the role of the Commission. The terms of reference have not been, fully agreed or set down yet. But what's set out in the programme for government and Housing for All, it's establishing the Commission on Housing, examining issues such as tenure, standards, sustainability, and quality of life issues on the provision of housing. And it's really to look at the long-term impacts on communities. So in terms of how we're providing our housing, how we're providing sustainability, and how is that impacting our communities. The Commission does give us an opportunity to look at the long-term strategic aspects of housing and look into, creating that supporting the Housing for All plan, but creating a sustainable system, so it's not chopping and changing each year, that across our society and across all our parties, that we agree an approach and stick to that approach. There's some areas maybe that will be specifically looked at, and I just highlight some of those. One is providing a balance and choice of tenures, the future of rent controls, rental and income supports, and then very most importantly for the approved housing body sector, the optimal role of the approved housing bodies in housing provision. So what is the future for the approved housing body sector will be one specific area that the Commission will look at. And it is also then to look at a referendum on housing and just consider our constitution and consider how housing is dealt with that, and put forward proposals in relation to a referendum on housing. So that's another key aspect of the Commission. So that's just a very brief overview. What is going to happen over the next number of months, there'll be expression of interest for those who want to put their names forward for being on the Commission or being on subcommittees of the Commission. And the Commission should be up and running by the end of November. That's the time scale. Then just moving on to just a few other slides in terms of housing and how we're looking at housing into the future. I'm taking this image is for a planning application that's to be lodged by the Land Development Agency. It's on land provided by the Housing Agency for a development of 600 houses and apartments, community facilities and retail facilities. It's in Balbriggan, North County Dublin. And it's just showing one aspect of one element of a lower density element of the development, where there's mixed housing and using a kind of a homestead model of housing, where each home gets some private open space, but there is good kind of intimate communal open space, in addition to more general public open space, but is to create and support communities. And within that design, it will include houses and apartments, so that there's much better integration between different sizes of households and different housing types within that development and within the broader part of development. So I say that is we need to be thinking maybe differently in terms of how we design, particularly to get community integration and get people working together. And then there's one other development which you're all maybe familiar with. This is a photograph now, was taken about a year ago, but it's a development in Stepaside in South Dublin, Dunleary, Rathdown County Council. It's a development being done by Respond, which Declan is going to be speaking in a moment, and to housing associations. It's supported by Dunleary, Rathdown, and land provided by the Housing Agency, but it's for 155 apartments and houses for public housing, both social housing and cost rental. But it's very important, particularly from a cost rental point of view, and the first constructed cost rental project. Just two slides to wrap up with, just looking at the approved housing body sector and the future of housing, and just a few thoughts. Again, I keep coming back to communities, and really important to keep focusing on communities, particularly with changing demographics and smaller household size. We need to really focus on that in terms of how do we get interaction of our communities and inclusion in our communities. And I'd ask you all just to really focus and think about that. On sustainability, think about sustainability in its broadest sense. So it's not about the design of the individual houses and how green they are. It's about where the houses are located. It's about how they fit in with other services. It's about our towns and our cities and villages. So think about sustainability in its broadest sense. The other thing I would ask all approved housing bodies and all housing providers is to really think about the tenants and the residents, and even maybe more than we sometimes do consider the tenants and the residents. So it's not about our organizations, it's about look at it from the residents' point of view. So if we're doing cost rental, how can we make the rents as low as possible? How can we provide security, long-term security of tenure, and how to create a situation where there is that kind of ownership, long-term security is of a mindset of anybody, residents of cost rental accommodation. Obviously, in terms of the sector, the ongoing provision of social housing in its various forms remain and is a critical aspect of the approved housing body sector and has to remain. Say the provision of cost rental housing, I think that will become more and more important over time, and in some ways it's kind of a merging between the two in terms of provision of public housing. Meeting the needs of vulnerable groups, again, and we've heard over the last number of days, is to think in terms of any provision of housing is how we're meeting the needs of vulnerable groups, whether it's people with disabilities, homeless people, the older persons, travellers, international protection in terms of asylum seekers. How do we meet those needs and always look at the opportunity for, again, inclusion and in all developments, and not to be segregating one form of housing from another, is to integrate as much as possible and making housing affordable. We want all housing to be affordable so that everyone has that opportunity to be able to afford and have secure housing. And then to finish, just on the sustainability side, and the Fridays for the Future was formed 3 years ago, actually. Just last month was formed in August 2018, and I don't know if you're aware kind of the protests from school children, and it recommences today. So I think it's important maybe we recognise Fridays for the Future, and that when we talk about the future, we're providing housing for our children today and future generations. So in terms of Greta Thunberg, the two statements from her, we need to think of our legacy to our children and the needs of future generations. And decision makers need to make hard choices. So all of you, in terms of decision makers and your influence in terms of our housing for the future and our communities for the future, sometimes there are hard choices to be made. So not just to build housing and do something just for the sake of meeting numbers. It's about, are we doing the right thing? Is it the right thing for the future? And if it isn't the right thing, not to do it. But I think we're all very committed to doing the right thing, and we just need to think about it as much as possible. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, John. Great to have already a bit of an insight. I think if you manage to keep the focus on this human-centered approach in your work in the Housing Commission, that will be really an achievement. Obviously, it's always tough to sort of go against the focus on the numbers, number of units, number of billions, but we see that it's really on the right track there. I'm interested in the focus on the environment and the lack. I mean, both yourself and Alison expressed concern about the use of vacant buildings, and it is surprising because we see at European level big stress on circularity. So 80% of what we extract from the planet is actually used in the construction sector. So I think it really is a missed opportunity not to have a really strong focus and build up of more pilots on how we can use vacant buildings. And I think also your focus on community development. So Alison mentioned earlier on that often there's a lack of funding for community development when it comes to housing. And that's not only the case in Ireland. We hear that from approved housing bodies across Europe, that there can be a certain gap there. So that's something I think of to be noted. So now we actually move on to hear from the only representative, if I'm not mistaken, from the approved housing body sector on the panel today. And I think you probably very much welcome the comment from John about the no chopping and changing. So if this is what we hear from the sector across Europe, it's chopping and changing is really the enemy of the sector, and the stability is really of vital importance. So trying to get it right from the get-go is going to be the challenge. So Declan, we're over to you now to hear from response, take on the situation and your input into the conversation today.
So thank you very much, Sorcha, and thank you, Donald and the ICSH for inviting us along today. So when I was doing a little bit of preparation for this, I was kind of concerned that what I was about to say was going to be revolutionary and off theme. But it turns out from listening to Lord Mayor and John and the other speakers that it's not. so that's a great pleasure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that relating to the many aspects of future-proofing delivery that I'm not going to talk about, and then the ones I am going to talk about. So, you know, obviously we'd have to think in terms of delivery about the financing, the construction capacity, skills and workforce, supply chain issues, all of that, different types of delivery in terms of offsite construction, you know, all of that. Supply type, we haven't talked about that this morning. A lot of interest in one beds. Response view is that we kind of believe in two beds because we think that the longer term sustainability, people who live alone may not live alone in the future. People who live alone may be separated, have children who want to stay over, and they may need carers to live with them at some stage in the future. Value for money is going to be a big issue. We'll be beating that drum. We believe it really strongly. You know, in our program of delivery and respond, there's quite a lot of activity. It's great. It's over 1.5 billion in the 5-year program. We've delivered 1,300 homes. We've 1,580 in construction today, and we've another 1,600 that were approved by our board up to last week, and they approved another 350 last week on top of that. And our average cost of delivery, including land, has been 297,000 euros, and that includes legal costs as well and every other cost. So value for money, I think, is a big theme going forward, so that we can have more homes from the same limited resources. And of course, we've heard about environmental sustainability. So Respond has been around 40 years, and in the last 5 years, because we have to think about our tenants who've been with us for some time, has spent 40 million in the last 5 years doing retrofits of older properties. Obviously, with the current guidelines, the current construction, you'll see so much like A-rated homes, and now, of course, NZERB-rated homes. A big issue for the future really is about the use of concrete. We really haven't addressed that yet. So we have been involved in timber construction, but timber prices have gone up and so on. So they're the things that I'm not going to go into any depth about. But what I do want to talk about is future-proofing of housing delivery in the context of the tenant experience, which we've heard about previously today, tenant engagement and meaningful tenant participation. And in particular in relation to family functioning and sustainable neighborhoods. So some people might know, we might go along, jump along to another slide there. And there's a theme that you're going to see in these slides. I suppose I wanted to draw attention to, in order to have our walkable cities, we're going to have to think about density. And not everything we're doing is going to be represented in some of these slides. I'm going to show you some of the larger density developments and some of the smaller ones outside the major urban areas. But yesterday, I was out in the Port McMarnock area and hadn't been there for some time. And I was really astounded to see brand new roads and this kind of density in the delivery of private housing pretty much everywhere. So we have to think about livability in that context. And we've been thinking about this for 18 months, and I'll be talking a little bit about that later on. In that image there, just to say that up on the top left-hand side is developing our own offices there in Grace Park Road of 101 units of 3 blocks of apartments there. On the right, just a completed development there in Cars Lane and Balgriffin. There's 56 homes. And down in the bottom left is quite a large development in the Fingal area in Charlestown, 138 apartments. And we've been working very closely with Anne-Marie, with Mark Garrity, and Liam Burke there about the intensive involvement of our housing staff to make a development like this a desirable and a livable community. And I could talk all day about that. And the other is in opposite IKEA there, Northwood is 55 units. So you might move along there if you don't mind. So this again is Northwood. It shows there's 2 blocks there. And when this was being developed with 55 apartments ranged between 2 blocks, we thought that this was high density, but things have moved on. So if we just look at another slide. So this is a development that was launched by the Minister yesterday down in Kilkenny. We were down there, glorious sunny day, unbelievably sunny day. And just to say that all of our work happens because we are invited by the local authority. And the local authority is the elected representative body, obviously, for each of county. It is the housing authority, it is the planning authority, and has so many more responsibilities. So our role as AHBs is, when invited, to play a small part in the housing plan of that local authority and be in tune with what they want to see develop. So we're very pleased to work closely with Kilkenny on this development, but actually also 2 others that we've just recently completed. So I want to move on then to another slide. And this one here, John had spoken about not necessarily knocking down buildings. And you'll notice, I think, there in the middle, that actually was a school building that the Mercy Sisters ran in Baltinglass. I love this picture because of the Wicklow Hills behind it. It's absolutely stunning. Standing in the bedrooms looking out at the view is just unbelievable. This has just been completed. The next slide is the important thing I want to mention to you. So right next door, this is the primary care centre for the Wicklow area. Now, people probably know I served on the board as a non-executive director of Ballymun Regeneration for 10 years, and we were incredibly proud that the first primary care centre was built in Ballymun, and it was a really formative decision in terms of the delivery of the whole range of services in an integrated way to that community, and has made a big difference. So our close relationship with the HSE is going to be incredibly important. And later I'm going to be talking to you about age-friendly, that as an age-friendly town. It's been assessed already as an age-friendly development. I think it scored 92 out of 100 on that regard. But later I'm going to be talking to you about our partnership with Trinity College and Professor Ian Robertson about how this site will come into play. So if we go on to the next slide, as we think again about the higher density, so this is closer to the approach we took in Ballymun Regeneration about density. It doesn't always have to be 6, 7, 8 story high buildings. This development is opposite the Finstown Hotel, the former Finstown Hotel in Lucan, and it's 94 homes with 17 different house types. Now, it's a different way of living. It's very interesting, and it's very beautiful, and you'll see why in a moment. So in this image, I've taken this image to show how, in fact, although this is very high quality and it's stunning in many ways, and the planting is very, very nice, it could be quite hard, like a hard surface kind of arrangement. So if we look at the next slide, you'll see why it's not. So we're really delighted that in our developments, increasingly what we're doing is we're preserving these fabulous trees that have been there for so long. So this is just a very small number of the amount of trees that have been preserved on this site. And we've moved towards, so if there's 94 homes, how many children will there be there? Where will they be? Are they going to be kind of outside their doors with cars right parked up to the door? Where are they going to be? How are they going to live? What's it going to be like for them? So in this particular development, you have this really beautiful playgrounds. Obviously, we took guidance from South Dublin County Council, our colleagues and friends there, and we really like this style. So the idea of, you know, these bright red, yellow and red plastic playgrounds is not really where we want to be, because what this does is this softens the whole development. You know, it takes a brand new development and makes it feel it's been here for a long time. And behind this is a wonderful playing field, which is the size of a football field. So I'll go on to another image there in the next slide. So this development is actually, it's not a photograph, it was the intended development, but if you're in Balgriffin today, you'll see it's completed. It's ready for occupation. And this is beside Balgriffin's cemetery there at Carr's Lane. There's 59 apartments. It is stunning. And just the whole idea of a little bit of a design ethos, a little bit of thinking of what it will feel like to live in that place. And again, preserving the trees and having the play facilities. One thing it has in there is it has a lot of bicycle capacity. In fact, for us, it's our first two-tier bike store. So you can pull down the upper shelf, put your bike and slide it up, and it holds many, many bikes. So we'll go on to another slide here, just about someplace other than Dublin, looking at Galway. We've 81 homes. This is one of the house types. There's many different house types there. But again, using the local stone, we've done the same in Cork and other places. So if I move on then to the next slide, you'll see 27 homes in Blanchardstown and Old Cardiff Road. And behind that, we've maintained all the hedgerows. The photo doesn't show it. And I'll go along now to the next slide to just talk a little bit about. So in order to do this, and we was talk about defects. And recently I heard Larkin Sor talking about, he was asked in a kind of a fairly interrogated by a journalist, what do you want to see? What would you like to see in terms of the way in which housing has been developed? And he said, what I'd like to see is I'd like to see quality and cost control from the beginning through every stage of development. And I got excited because we're very fortunate. We have over 20 architects, planners and quantity surveyors employed directly in Respond. And Respond has always employed its own architectural staff. And so what we're doing is we're overseeing this work. We have a model where we enter into development agreements at fixed prices with our private sector partners. And we own the land and pay for it at the beginning, and we pay stage payments as we go through the process. And through our own staff and the professional firms we employ, we are checking to see that the quality and the delivery and the cost control is there throughout. So we're not stepping in at the end buying turnkey projects wondering, I wonder whether there are defects. I wonder, is there a problem? We know because we're quality controlling it ourselves. So I'll go along the last couple of slides and finish up with this. This is a big issue. So people will know something about Respond, about the scale of our activity and so on. But probably what people don't know is that, like the tagline we have, our board chose, was building homes and improving lives. And they probably don't know that although we have 320 staff, 190 of those staff are involved in delivering services to people. And that's not I'm not counting the 56 people in housing services and tenancy management. I'm talking about 6 homeless services, 17 early education and childcare services, 8 programs with local authorities supporting program refugees in their resettlement into Ireland, 3 elder care daycare services for people at late stages of their lives, often with dementia and other issues. And really in that case, we're trying to support the carers so they have 1 or 2 days a week where they can get about their own lives. Also family support services. And of course, we've 87 community buildings, so delivering services around the place. So we've moved in because we are in fact, so many of our staff are social care, social work and psychology graduates. We're particularly interested in understanding where people come from and understanding that we all have challenges in our lives. So we're well on the way to becoming a trauma-informed organization with everybody in the organization trained. So I'll move on then to the last thing, which is we have a partnership with Trinity College and Professor Ian Robertson, who runs the Global Brain Health Institute. He got a legacy gift from Atlantic Philanthropies, Chuck Feeney of 150 million. So we've been working closely with them, and they've been informing how we're designing our homes, but also we've run a housing and brain health conference, which was attended by 27 different countries this year. And we're going on to do one about creativity and sustainable neighborhoods. I could talk a lot about that. I'll just flick it, if you're way onto the last two slides then, which just really show people. So what I'm saying there, Sorcha, is we're trying to really reflect what people actually need, not just good quality housing. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot there to Declan Dunne, CEO of Respond. I think it's still a sector where people need more information. Still, traditionally, it has been a quite small sector in Ireland compared to other EU member states. And it's thanks to this plan, it's about to grow quite significantly in numbers. So I think this role of getting the word out, explaining to people, actions are louder than words, and giving people an insight into the projects delivered is really crucial. So thanks a lot for that, Declan. Now we're going to hear, so before we have some questions coming through, but before that, we're going to hear from the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission representative, so the Chief Commissioner there, Sinéad Gibney. So many people, Sinéad, would say that the housing plan, the human rights has to be the start and end point of the housing plan. So I think it's really great that you're joining us today to give us your perspective and the perspective of the Commission.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Sorcha, for the welcome, and warm greetings to the other panel speakers here today, Lord Mayor, John and Declan. It's been really great to hear your contributions, and across all of them focus on community sustainability and people-centred solutions. At this critical moment in Irish housing policy, I'm really pleased to share with you the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission's key housing concerns as Ireland's national human rights institution and national equality body. And I've got two key messages that I want to get across today. Firstly, I want to speak about the right to adequate housing and its role in future-proofing our housing system, as this session is so aptly called. And secondly, I want to speak about why it's important to consider the differential experiences of people in our housing system. Who we are matters, our gender, our family status, our age, our ethnicity. These things all impact on our experience of the housing market. Like everyone tuning in today, the Commission is particularly interested in the implementation of the government's Housing for All plan. Housing for All does acknowledge the specific needs of particular groups, including people with a disability, older people and travellers, and includes the need for more and improved traveller-specific accommodation. It also highlights the commitment to end homelessness by 2030 as signed under the Lisbon Declaration this year. But as our recent research shows, even when affordability is a common problem, it has an even more profound impact on some groups than others. And some groups, such as lone parents, face structural problems in the housing market that go beyond income poverty. A long-term housing strategy that doesn't adequately tackle these societal structural inequalities is going to find that even with significant investment and sustained implementation, that those inequalities will still persist at the end of it. As a major statement of public policy, we in the Commission will be reviewing the Housing for All plan against domestic and international human rights and equality standards. And our analysis will inform our future reporting on human rights in Ireland to both the EU and the UN over the next 12 months and indeed beyond. One observation I will make on the Housing for All plan is that as of today, there is no clear government commitment to ensure the right to adequate housing. There's a pledge stemming from the Programme for Government to explore a referendum on housing. And as we've heard, that commitment is to be delivered through the Commission on Housing, which is yet to be established. And the right to housing perspective is almost absent from the government's Housing for All strategy. So as a Commission, we believe that a clearer commitment is needed by government to ensure the right to adequate housing. And I'd like to talk a bit now about enshrining the right to housing. Adequate housing is necessary for the achievement of other fundamental rights like health and family life, and it's central to the quality of life of both adults and children. Our homes underpin our ability to access work and school and to live the life that we choose. Housing deprivation has so many knock-on impacts, including poor mental and physical health, and in worse cases, homelessness and deaths, which obviously have consequences beyond the individuals, but for wider society. Everyone has the right to live somewhere with security, peace and dignity, and the state has a responsibility to meet international standards to achieve this. A rights-based approach to housing not only acknowledges that housing is more than bricks and mortar, it also combats known inequality in the housing sector. It's important to point out here that recognising the right to adequate housing does not mean free housing for all. The UN has emphasised that the right to adequate housing does not require the state to build housing for the entire population. Instead, recognising the right to adequate housing puts an emphasis on the state's role and purpose in ensuring that people have a suitable place to live. It covers measures required to prevent homelessness. It ensures security of tenure to all. It guarantees that housing is adequate, and it protects the most vulnerable. And it can be achieved through legislation, regulation, policy, or public spending. And most likely it will be a combination of all four. And it's also important to say that this is not a radical or outlandish idea. Across Europe, the right to housing is recognised in the constitutions of Belgium, Finland, Greece, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, and Sweden, and in the legislation of Austria, France, Germany, Luxembourg, and the UK. And there's evidence that the Irish public agree with this policy choice. We commissioned separate surveys in 2018 and 2020, which both found that 82% of people in Ireland consider housing to be a basic human right. Next, I'd like to discuss the outcomes for different groups in the housing market. Earlier this month, we published, together with the ESRI, new research entitled Monitoring Adequate Housing in Ireland. And the report looked in detail at 6 dimensions of housing adequacy: accessibility, affordability, security of tenure, cultural adequacy, quality, and location. And it developed a tool to monitor adequate housing by identifying these indicators for measuring progress. The report highlighted the disadvantages experienced by young people, migrants, people with disabilities, travellers, and others in the Irish housing system. Regarding findings related to specific groups, the research found that lone parents are among the most disadvantaged in Ireland's housing market, particularly vulnerable to experiencing housing deprivation. Single parents and their children account for 53% of all homeless families now, and are much more likely to live in substandard housing with low quality. I'd like to share the words of Ellen Scanlon, a lone parent who shared her experience in going to viewings on the day that we published the report. I used to have a shirt in my car, a nice blouse, hairbrush, and makeup to make myself really presentable, almost like doing an interview. On going to a viewing, you feel prejudged, going in against 2 professionals with different circumstances, and I'm going in there saying, I'm on HAP, I'm a single parent. The UN Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing, Professor Rajagopal, who helped us launch our report, asked the question, how are we actually treating as a society single parents and their children? We speak here not about few individuals. 1 out of 5 persons in Ireland lives in a single parent household, and 86% of lone parents in Ireland are women. If we are serious about ending gender discrimination, if we want to end discrimination of children, then we must act, and act now. As a lone parent myself, this particular report really resonated with me. I acknowledge my privilege that meant my own barriers were nowhere near as high as those faced by others in the same group. But nonetheless, I have first-hand experience of the challenges of finding adequate housing as a single mum, and the knock-on effects that it had on my life and my daughters and our ability to participate in society as a family. The research also found that over 35% of Asians or Asian Irish people, 39% of travellers, and over 40% of Black or Black Irish people live in overcrowded accommodation, and that young people, migrants, lone parents, and people with disability are especially likely to report an inability to keep a home warm compared to the total population. The report uncovered 3 high-level considerations on achieving adequate housing for everyone that I'll run through briefly before I finish. Firstly, we're missing vital data. There's a need for more collection of equality data so that people's housing needs and outcomes can be measured. Data around ethnicity, travellers, refugees, and asylum seekers are all significantly lacking in current surveys and administrative data. Secondly, on secure housing, important measures of housing adequacy, such as security, are not properly measured. We need to better measure the levels of instability of housing in Ireland. And thirdly, COVID and homelessness. We're already seeing levels of homelessness rise following the lifting of pandemic protections. Homeless figures also exclude those in hidden homeless living situations, those staying with friends or family, sofa surfing, or those who are not engaging with homeless services. So to conclude, as the National Human Rights and Equality body, we in the Commission have asserted once again our recommendation that the state enshrine the right to housing in the Constitution of Ireland. This won't fix the housing crisis alone. but it's an important step to reframe access to housing in Ireland, the policy, legislation and funding that shapes this access, and the place of housing in long-term public policy planning. Research clearly shows how some groups in society are much more likely to experience poor housing. We believe, therefore, that the state must adopt an explicit human rights and equality-based approach to the transition from COVID-19 to support a more just and equal society. The alternative, as we know, means persistent inequality and a continuous and often inadequate search for short-term policy fixes to address it. The emergency measures adopted in 2020 to prevent homelessness demonstrate that dramatic state action is both possible and can be effective. Finally, in accepting the significant role that adequate housing plays in our quality of life in society, we need to foster an environment in Ireland where adequate housing is recognised, is affordable, and where security, habitability and environment are essential considerations. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Sinead. And I think the points you raise are hugely important. I mean, I'm coming from the sector where we are really on the coalface. So there are housing providers all over Europe delivering social housing to the best of their capacities. But as you point out, it really cannot be a sticky plaster over much deeper problems, because then it results in inadequate housing despite the best efforts. So I think what it really points to is the need for the Commission to really focus also on cross-departmental work to tackle those deeper discriminatory issues, for instance, at a much higher level before we get to the actual, before those problems are manifesting themselves at local level and they become an issue that's very hard to deal with for the housing providers. So I think this cross-departmental work, both at the macro level and at the local level, is going to be key. We have a few questions. I see, and before we have the sum up, Donald's going to join us for the sum up, but we have a few questions coming through from our audience today. And the first few are coming, have been addressed to the Lord Mayor herself, and a lot around zoning issues. So they're one quite specific one. I'll try to group them a little bit, Alison. So the possibility of unzoning sites, and the example is given of the Cheevers, where there's no signs of developments happening. Another one sort of linked to that, about your views on site land value tax that should reduce speculation and vacancy. And then one a little bit broader, a question asking if you think the current plan goes far enough to address the issues you've raised around financialization of housing. I don't know if you'd like to address those.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. On the last question first, no, I don't think Housing for All addresses the commodification of financialization of housing. I think we need a specific standalone plan for that. On the site land value tax, I'm not sure if it's the vacant site or just, but we do have a vacant land tax. The one problem I would see with it, that there is it defines the size of the site, and I think that size needs to be reduced so we can incorporate more sites in it, and I do think it needs to get more aggressive the longer it lies idle. On the unzoning of sites, yeah, the Cheevers site is the one I cited in the presentation, and we rezoned that from enterprise to residential because there is a housing need in the area. When we zone sites for a particular in a particular way, there has to be a good planning reason for it. And the good planning reason for zoning that was that there is a massive housing need on it. And while many of us would like to, I suppose, punish the developer for what they are doing on that site, putting in a planning application, changing a planning application, and now flipping it, there is no, I suppose, rational planning reason to unzone it. I think what we need to look at is how we deal with, I suppose, land speculation, which is exactly what they have done and what is happening across our city and across our country. And if we can nail that, and also sort of take into consideration, I think that the planning, the length of time a planning application can be live, we should see some sort of, I suppose, a quicker turnaround of houses getting built as opposed to land with planning permissions on them getting hoarded for speculation. Thank you. You're muted, Sorcha.
So again, an issue that's being tackled across the board across Europe, and we will issue a report on the 6th, actually, with best practice around land use for affordable housing. There was another question also to Alison, but I think you've addressed it. How will DCC access more land for the housing needs that are there? But I think you've really addressed that in your last response. And a couple of questions to John, some practical ones just around the Commission. So we have a question saying, considering the role of the AHP sector, can we assume that there will be some representatives on the Commission? And again, will the government issue a call for expression of interest to be in the Commission? Then also a little bit more specific, will the Commission produce a Sorcha care type report? So I'm not sure about that one, what that means, but you'll know yourself, John. And then going a little bit back to the role of the housing agency and the stress you put on sustainable communities, and whether the housing agency has issued any guidance on developing sustainable housing and communities. And the last one there to John. So given the importance of affordability, sorry, John, there's quite a few there. This is the last one. What is John O'Connor's view on the central bank's reservations about the proposed shared equity scheme and the potential to fuel housing inflation? I'd like to come back on some of those. I think that'd be great.
Thanks, Sorcha. You know, in terms of the Commission itself, just on the practicalities, there will be an advertisement within the next few weeks in terms of seeking expression of interest for those who want to be on the Commission, and there'll also be subcommittees on the Commission. So that it's not just the Commission itself. There'll be various subcommittees that will need membership. And I think rather than seeing it as a kind of a representative body, it's to get people with expertise in various areas and to be acting, you know, the best interests of the Commission and in the best interest of our society. We don't want people just lobbying for their individual organisations' positions. We want to see what is the best, you know, from a housing point of view for the country. In terms of Sorcha care and Sorcha, Sorcha care is a lot in the news here at the moment. The part of the report will have to be in terms of what is the future of housing, in terms of how do we get to a sustainable housing system and a long-term housing system. And it'll have to address some specific issues that are going to be assigned to it. One, you know, being discussed there by Sinéad in relation to the referendum on housing, and a lot of work has to be done in relation to that. I don't want to talk too much in terms of the housing agency. Yeah, there have been various documents, you know, issued by the housing agency in relation to sustainability, and you know, different forms of housing in relation to sustainability. So I can send on, you know, just details of those publications. Just one interesting recent publication from last year was looking at housing around Europe. So the housing agency took various housing developments of public housing, social housing in particular, and provided them. And there's one kind of bigger publication on sustainability that was published about 3 or 4 years ago, but I can send on the details of those. And then in terms of the last point in relation to shared equity, which got a lot of press, my own view in terms of affordable purchase housing is, you know, a shared equity model is appropriate. if someone is buying a home, the state supports the person into home ownership, but is fair and equitable to the rest of society. So rather than giving grants, such as currently there's a Help to Buy grant, which is money provided, it's better that somebody's assisted, but they're not getting anything better than somebody who isn't buying a house, somebody who's renting. So it's getting shared equity is good from the point of view of balance and fairness. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And the last one, question. Well, actually, there's just one comment, and I think you also address it there, John. So there's a comment that I think training for those on the ground trying to establish sustainable communities with residents is vital and seems to be lacking. So already you've outlined a couple of reports there.
Yeah, and there, we did it in terms of self-organized architecture. The housing agency, provide a lot of support in relation to that work, and maybe most importantly, in the Affordable Housing Act, we ensured that kind of community-led housing and land trusts, were written into it in terms of being able to be provided with funding. So, I'm not in the housing agency anymore, but it has done a lot, either directly or behind the scenes in relation to supporting the provision of affordable housing. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And then just the last question directed at a response. So to you, Declan, and linking in indeed with the presentation from Sinéad Gibney. So they comment, fabulous looking development. By respond, what percentage of the development are wheelchair livable, and how is this percentage decided for each development?
So, Sorcha, essentially what we do is we work with our local authorities, and we're looking at the local housing need in the area. So we establish the need and demand before we proceed with any particular development. So bearing on that in mind, we build in what level of accessibility is required, but there is accessibility in all our developments. So we recently had a development in Fermoy in County Limerick, which was actually designed by Respond's own architects, and it was on land from the housing agency, the land aggregation scheme. And I must say, I was kind of moved to tears when I went into that, because I went in and found this fabulous bungalow as part of this large development, and I saw 2 fully accessible bathrooms and accessible kitchen, and I asked, why were there 2 fully accessible bathrooms? And I was told it was for a specific family with 2 children, one a teenager and one a younger child, who were going to live in that home. And actually there's a video of them now talking about their experience. In addition to that, the site was a very steep site, and we were providing accessible accommodation for older people. And given that there was going to be one apartment on top of the other, one is accessible from the lower level of the site, fully accessible flat level, and the other is accessed from behind, at the road behind, also fully accessible. So we're very committed to accessibility.
Thanks a lot, Declan. I think we've come to the end of the session. It's been obviously a lot of conversations that need to be continued. I think we're all very much on the same page, but turning words into action and in the implementation of the plan is obviously more challenging. So I've changed my background, so I've learned how to do it after 1.5 years of these conferences, but it's especially for Donal, because we're organizing the Responsible Housing Award. So Donal calls it the Eurovision of Housing Awards. So we saw some of the really nice projects that were awarded yesterday, the Irish Council of Social Housing. So we're hoping to get a few of those coming through as well to the awards we're organizing with the International Union of Tenants, which will be, they will be presented at the International Social Housing Festival hosted by the city of Helsinki. And I would like to stress that the Helsinki is the world leader in a way of tenure blind developments, going back to Alison's reference earlier on. So Donal, the Eurovision, I hope you'll be encouraging your members to enter there. And it's not a given that Italy's going to win. Donal, I hand the screen over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sorcha. Thanks a lot. And Another great session, great speakers to tie up. This has been like the Olympics of housing for the last 3 days. Just to introduce myself, my name is Donal McMahon, CEO of the Irish Council for Social Housing, and I'd just like to say a few final words and thanks in closing the conference. Firstly, we had over 600 delegates signed up the conference this week, attend various sessions, peaked at about under 700 on Wednesday, and really reflects the widespread attendance from the public, private and HP sector, reflects the kind of interdependency we have in providing social and affordable housing for tenants and owners. This is probably the first major outing or discussion on housing for all, and we've always thought it would be extremely valuable, get people's initial views and positions from different sectors, whether HP representatives or public and private sector representatives on the plan and how to address affordability, sustainability, special needs and so forth. So we're grateful for people's input on that. At the end of the day, housing for all has a lot of interlinked parts, and probably this plan compared to other plans has more housing and planning issues interlinked. So it would suggest probably a better outcome long term than we previously had before, maybe more opaque language, more generalities, and it is welcome the level of funding in this plan to achieve the outcomes and delivery for all types of housing. Like, state investment is key, and we cannot achieve ambition without this. It also has to be acknowledged, in fairness, the work of the officials in the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage in translating with the government and the Minister of Housing's political priorities into strategies, programmes and targets, as well as trying to deal with the stakeholders as well. The department, or ultimately in government, are policy makers, we're policy takers, and we try our bit to influence on that. So acknowledge all the work that was done to put this together. Like, obviously there'll be much further work required in areas such as planning, tax and operational aspects of different social housing schemes and affordable housing schemes we've mentioned yesterday, on cost rental as real watershed to bring that into the long term, having a multi-annual programme on that. So for our sector, what can we offer? How do we organise this event? Like, our sector at the moment has around 45,000 homes by the end of 2021. This has increased by a third number of homes since 2016, as well as diversifying and offering more services for vulnerable households, more homeless households. This increase in diversification has been achieved with the support and partnership with local authorities, the housing agency, HFA, the private sector, financial bodies such as AIB, the private development sector who are attending here, where there will be many successful and recurrent joint ventures. And we hope that will continue. And hopefully in future, the LDA will be our potential important partner for delivery. The sector, in tandem with expansion diversity, has been involved in the voluntary regulations in 2014, now statutory regulation with the new statutory framework and regulatory authority, ABRA, established. So as a sector, we're actively considering what can be our contribution collectively to housing for all, whether it be social, affordable cost rental, ownership, and importantly, special needs housing as well. Our sector has been adding about 10% of permanent new social housing to stock in recent years, which is sustainable. But looking at our current assumptions and pipelines, it points to the sector being able to double the number of homes in management over the next decade to around 90,000 homes, both for general needs and special needs housing, assuming there are no undue financial and regulatory burdens to limit that. And as was mentioned, however, it's just not about scale. It's about ensuring vulnerable groups have access to housing. Some groups see more access to housing being more an issue than affordable housing. So I think for some vulnerable groups, access to housing is a priority. And this is one part of housing for all. Current HBs, we saw this morning, can use their experience and support local authorities in these areas. The sector and HBs are keen to assist local authorities with the forthcoming action plans and targets. One very positive thing we did encounter was during the pandemic was the common purpose of all parts of the social housing sector and the wider housing sector and public bodies, and the rapid decision making and engagement we encountered. We should continue with this feature or kind of discipline in the rollout of housing for all. Things happened over weekends, overnights. Policy making was done on the hoof and had to be done at that time. Overall, we hope you found this conference, different parts of the conference relevant and of value to your organisation. We have to sincerely thank all the speakers, both from Ireland, overseas, and the chairs for chairing the session and their significant input in the presentations. This all helped to enable further engagement with delegates. And specifically, we'd like to thank AIB for their support and our ability to run this event. It was invaluable both this year and the previous 2 years, and particularly Paul Kelly, AIB, as our key contact point. Putting all this together is complicated. It's multi-site, multi-continent. So I'd like to thank the ICSH staff in particular on their hard work in bringing this together, this conference over 3 continents, 3 different time zones, with Asia, with US, Europe not so bad, but it was a challenge. So we'd like to thank staff and also crowd comments for the technical support to enable that. The other thing is we do ask delegates to view the Community Housing Awards, the shortlist of projects, the entries, the winners in the 2021 Community Housing Awards, and high quality homes and communities where people live in, and maybe some will be entered into the Eurovision of projects as Sorcha mentioned over the coming months. Some really good projects, different scale and really different actors involved, and really it's all about, and you see from the project, it's all about people and places, and whatever we develop is what we leave behind, and that's a key consideration for John and his colleagues in future proofing. What we will leave behind for tenants, communities, the environment and society. There are big challenges ahead. There's the climate issue. The aging issue was mentioned yesterday, another 250,000 people over 65 by the end of 2030. That's a big challenge. And also fundamentally on the other side is the capacity in the construction industry to help us to deliver. That's going to be a big challenge as well for skilled up. So possibly, or maybe hopefully, this will be our last full online biennial conference. You know, either we'll go hybrid or get loose again and go back to the country. So on behalf of the Irish Council for Social Housing, again, we thank people, we wish them well, and we hope to see people soon in a physical sense. And so it was great to have people here at such a big attendance, and we look forward to engaging very soon. Thanks very much, Sorcha, and thanks everyone.